We lost Tyler Weigel to suicide when we were 42. He posted online in April of 2020 that his mom had recently passed away from a stroke. This was early pandemic and we were all very much still hunkered down. I spotted the post and suddenly remembered Terry Weigel, his mom, and what she looked like. How, as a sculptor, she stored many of her distinctive pieces around their house. I had stared at them on the many occasions I had come over to play in 7th grade. So on that day, I sent Tyler my condolences, despite not having seen or spoken to him since 1996, the year I left Seattle. 5 days later, through social media posts, I learned that Tyler too had died. The next memory came quickly. It was a cool autumn night in 1990 near Concordia Lutheran School, where we both attended, up in the North Seattle suburb Wedgwood. I wrote about it in his memoriam. In 7th grade, I was new at a school across town. One night, playing neighborhood football, Tyler Weigel took me aside, pointed downfield and said, "Hey Russell, run really fast that way and look up over your right shoulder. The ball will fall right into your hands." I didn't believe it because I was fat and awkward and sucked at sports, but I ran anyway. And about 20 yards downfield, I glanced up over my right shoulder, and the football magically landed in my hands. I told that story recently to my kids about how a select few people are sports superheroes. Nowadays, decades later, I watch football regularly with my 2 sons. I'm a Seahawks fan despite not having lived in Washington State for near 30 years. As we watch Geno Smith throw for 100 yards, I describe the physics required to make the ball land precisely where it's intended. Takes a lot of practice, I tell them. In 7th grade, Tyler evidently had practiced a lot. He was athletic, not to mention good-looking and popular. He came from one of those families, you know the type, whose dads put their boys in T-ball at 2 and Pop Warner football by 4. He felt big feelings. With sports, he wasn't the biggest kid, but he'd play with a fierce heart. "You're trying too hard," he'd shout at me at the basketball court. "You can't play zone offense, there's no such thing." Before recess, the boys would talk at lunch about going to watch sporting events with their dads. "But I hate the Kingdome," Tyler said of our city's stadium. "It's stinky and it's smelly and it smells." He was kind. I remember telephoning his house one night to seek advice on how to break up with my technically first girlfriend, and he gave me words to use graciously. Another day, he made fun of my hair or clothes for no reason, as boys in 7th grade sometimes do. "You're so Studley-like," he'd say with a sneer. "I wish I could be like you." Sometimes, he would say funny things. On a field trip, as the school bus passed the cemetery in Ravenna just off 35th Avenue near the U District, Tyler admitted that, as a small child, he thought we buried people after they died so they would grow back. Some days I'd see a different side of Tyler, pretending to act older than we were. Sneaking out at night during sleepovers, he'd climb us onto the roof at Decatur Middle School to play with knives and taste vodka. He would regale us with pop culture references we maybe shouldn't have heard at 12 years old, like the vile words Chucky spews at his victims in the movie Child's Play, or the sexually charged lyrics from Two Live Crew's band album, As Nasty as They Want to Be. In 1990, I still didn't know a lot about music. My favorite song in 7th grade was One More Try by Timmy T. And this is what TV and film gets wrong about the 90s. Music supervisors will inject sound bites of alternative post-Seattle grunge like Everclear's Santa Monica or anything by Stone Temple Pilots. For those of us who were there, put on Timmy T and you'll instantly remember the fall of 1990. But I digress. What I'd like to talk about has to do with an incident that happened 2 years later at the Camelot Music Record Store at South Center Mall in Tukwila in late 1992. Camelot Music was located in the Rainier Court, adjacent to the Silver Coin Arcade on the south side of the mall. Many an adolescent could be found loitering in the KB Toys and Orange Julius near the glass exit doors. On that day, I was browsing the alternative rock section, which within mere months had shifted from a single display column to the second largest subdivision in the store. I carried in my hands a compact disc of Babes in Toyland's sophomore album, Fontanelle. Now, Camelot was a mainstream competitor of The Warehouse and Musicland's Sam Goody. It was a far cry from indie shops like Cellophane Square or Orpheum Records, where local artists promoted their demo tapes. But this was still Seattle, and now and then you could still find, if you were there at the right time, the secretly stocked import titles tucked between the studio releases. A few weeks earlier, I had discovered there and purchased Nirvana's split single with a Jesus Lizard, titled Puss, Oh the Guilt. "Excuse me," said a voice from behind me. I turned and saw a thin black man in his late 20s, standing next to an older black man in his 50s. I could imagine how I looked, a stout, wall-eyed Asian kid in a baseball cap, scrupulously poring over rock albums that didn't quite match his appearance. "I'm sorry to bother you," said the younger man. He was taller than me, but not intimidating. He wore a plain collared shirt of a single color. "I don't mean to startle you, but I felt the need to approach you." I didn't ask why. I had no words. "You have a demon following you," he said. "There is a demon, and I'd like permission to pray over you." In 1989, I began attending school in a different part of town. Prior to this, my Asian American family never traveled farther north than the Space Needle. But now, my sister had been admitted to Seattle Prep, a private Catholic school on Capitol Hill. This was a fancy school for rich kids. My parents figured this could present opportunities for us working-class Rainier Valley brats. But Seattle Prep was 8 miles the opposite direction of my elementary school at the time in Skyway. And so, my mom decided to keep me in the same general direction as my sister's high school by enrolling me in a school up north. As a consequence, we had to make friends in a different world than the one in which we were raised. And this is the beginning of my story about discovering the part of town beyond the South Seattle bubble of my childhood. For my sister Stacy, this included the neighborhoods Capitol Hill, Montlake, and Madison Park. For me, it began at Wedgwood and Meadowbrook. In memory, I like to call this North Seattle world Hamelin. I borrow its name from the folktale of a Pied Piper who drove away rats from the city streets with music. In 1991, I began writing fictional stories about it, composing them on an IBM 386 computer late at night after my parents were asleep and my sister locked her door. In this world I created, I could live out and explore the feelings I felt at ages 12, 13, and 14, at a time when I had few friends or family to provide another outlet. I could kill people in this world to help me deal with the emotions that I felt. But back to 1990. One friend my sister Stacy invited to our house during her freshman year was Aubrey Hernandez, who lived in Broadmoor. Stacy described her as being a little weird. The curious part of Aubrey's visit first involves something from the past. Several years prior, our next-door neighbor June Gilbert had gifted us a then-popular Parker Brothers game called Ouija as a Christmas present. Neither of my immigrant parents had any clue what this was. The Gilberts also owned a Ouija board and kept it in their living room downstairs. I saw it left out once and touched the black cotton under the legs of its planchette. June, an ardent atheist, explained to me the ideomotor phenomenon, how unconscious muscular exertions would move the planchette through a process called automatism. I was 9 years old at the time, so when my sister and I discovered ours didn't do anything, we tucked it away in the basement closet to gather dust for years. But on the very day Aubrey Hernandez came over to play at our house, the Ouija board suddenly began to work. Now, I didn't really know much about God or the devil, except that they both existed. Even the least bit of faith can foster protection against the influences of darkness, I suppose. And I dare say a cultural community like the Asian one in which we lived helped as well. It's meant to anyway. But that's why I never questioned why the Ouija planchette never moved. It wasn't supposed to. Ghosts and spirits weren't part of our persuasion. But on that probably rainy Seattle day in early 1990, when Stacy told me the Ouija worked, I had to see it for myself. My school teachers didn't see me as a kid with problems. I earned high grades in school. I was spelling bee champion. I won the piano tournament twice. And despite being the only non-white kid in class, I'd had moderate success making friends at my new school. Well, as easy as friendships can be in 7th grade. It wasn't the first time white kids had made fun of me for being Asian. They'd read my name with exaggerated difficulty looking over seat assignments, going, Naka Hamahura? And that wasn't as bad as kids who'd pull their eyelids horizontally and say, Wing-Wong Fing-Fong, and ask me to translate what they'd just said in Japanese. No, mostly I would just get questions and curious looks. Like most 12-year-olds, I just wanted to fit in. I can't say it felt good when classmates said they weren't allowed to come to my house because South Seattle was dangerous. But at least I managed to play sports and develop creative talents that were unique to me, like writing stories and drawing cartoons. It just so happened that the cartoons I drew were incredibly violent, like a man firing automatic weapons into numerous people, with blood and brains bursting out of the exit wounds. On the afternoon of December 18th, 1990, heavy snow fell upon the city. Despite Seattle being a northern town in a northern state, snow days were actually quite rare. So that day, shortly before Christmas vacation, the sight of white flakes sticking on the ground got us middle schoolers really excited. Sometime later, after classes were dismissed, after it was dark outside, I found myself one of the last school kids waiting to be picked up. For the most part, my 7th grade classmates lived within a walking distance of school. They had all gone home, and I wasn't acquainted with them well enough to wait out the storm at their houses. That night I knew my mom had a long commute. I didn't know when she would get me, or if she could even reach me. See, there weren't ways to communicate with school other than land-based phones. I had to listen to news updates over the classroom radio broadcasting about how the I-5 freeway was closing due to the ice. My mom eventually did reach me hours later. During the night drive home, at one point we abandoned our car in the snow because the road became too difficult to navigate. We walked outside in the dark until a good Samaritan with a 4-wheel drive SUV picked us up. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the devil chose this time in my life to send a demon after me. The Ouija board had become sort of a parlor game of cheap entertainment on our block on Beacon Hill. Once it started working, Stacy and I showed it to some of our neighborhood friends. We'd ask it to do things, like tell the future, predict who'd win the Sonics game, or even dare it to play tricks on our family dog like some carnival psychic. It was cool and fun. The spirit occupying the board had a name, a backstory. It told us it was a young boy who died on the train tracks down Beacon Hill, the same ones we could see below the I-5 freeway running parallel to Boeing Field. As I write this today, I find myself still kind of afraid of talking about this, of uttering the spirit's name or describing what it spoke. Yet as children, we took what it said not as deception, but as something fantastic and true. Most of the time we tested its abilities. Tell us Colleen Watkins' home phone number. The planchette moved in swift circular motions. It selected numbers. We wrote them down. Then we'd open up the school directory, and sure enough, the phone number was correct. These innocuous experiences led us to more serious questions. We'd come home and pull out the board to summon our spirit, this time to ask why a boy or girl in class was mad at us, something perfectly logical yet urgent for an adolescent to ask. Eventually we'd try to find out whether my sister would have a date to a certain dance, or if another girl liked me back. What began as a minor amusement evolved into a kind of psychic ally. We convinced ourselves the spirit had to be a good one. I mean, the dog wasn't frightened by it. Eventually I wanted to show this off to my school friends. Maybe for validation, maybe just for having a cool device other kids didn't have. When my classmates Jeff Strom and Lincoln Webeking visited for a rare sleepover at my house in South Seattle, I pressured them into checking out the Ouija. Surely we were in the basement talking about girls or sports or movies, as, 7th graders do. I retrieved the box from my closet and removed the board and planchette. I wanted them to see my toy. I wanted them to think it was cool, and likewise think I was cool for owning it. Jeff and Lincoln laughed it off. I tried to sit them down, goading them to put their hands on the planchette. Lincoln shifted his voice into that of a sing-songy fortune teller. Jeff ran upstairs. I chased after them, yelling, cursing at them to give the board a try. I hated that they didn't believe me. I needed them to know it was real, and that I wasn't making it all up. Some days later, when we were back at school, Lincoln and Jeff revealed to me why they wouldn't play with the board. Long ago, their parents had forbade them from touching anything to do with the occult, specifically Ouija boards. They were products of real Christian homes. In parochial school, I had been told stories from the Bible. This included Matthew chapter 8, verse 28, when Jesus cast demons out of 2 possessed men. He commanded the evil spirits out and sent them into a herd of pigs. These pigs rushed down a steep bank and threw themselves into the sea, drowning in a mass suicide. By then, I had also watched enough movies on cable television to know better than to get involved with evil spirits. Demons had powers. They could enter the bodies of humans and animals. They could inflict disease and cause physical infirmity. They could harm unbelievers. I suppose there was enough godly will inside of me at age 12 to convince me I could be in danger. So eventually I got rid of the Ouija altogether in 1991. Things didn't get better right away. Life at home was messy. I didn't understand what oppression meant from a spiritual sense, but maybe I was too young to know any different. Another year went by. Then I was at the mall at Camelot Music. "I rebuke you, demon! In the name of Jesus, I rebuke you!" the young black man shouted amid confused customers. The older black man nodded with amens in stern concentration. I mostly just watched in bewilderment. They handed me a postcard about their church. Both wished me well. I thanked them, but the exchange left me scared and embarrassed. I walked back to the food court where my mom and sister were eating Sparrow pizza. I told them what had happened. "You should say, 'Go away, leave me alone,'" my mother instructed me in broken Japanese English. It was my mother's general mantra to remain neutral and uninvolved, and not to bother anybody. In truth, I didn't know how to feel. This confused me more than anything. Given the choice of having a demon or not having a demon, I'm sure I'd choose the latter. But the notion of an oppressive entity didn't frighten me. At 13, I had bigger problems than demons or ghosts. I mean, come on. Sure, I'd sneak watch late night viewings of Hellraiser and Witch Board and the Elm Street movies of the time, and we'd all let shapes in the darkness trick our eyes to run our imaginations amok, but I'd never seen a ghost or ghoul. I didn't know what a demon looked like, let alone understand what one was meant to do. But I have experienced sleep paralysis. This is the feeling of lying in bed, unable to move but awake and conscious of what's going on. Afflicted people speak of shadow figures that terrorize you while you're defenseless. I would sense such an entity many years later in a room where I slept. I was 20, living in a cottage off Las Flores Canyon in the Santa Monica Mountains. The entity's presence first hovered near my bed, then above me, then directly beside my face. My muscles regained control. I gathered courage, turned over, and looked its direction. The entity billowed like big black smoke. Anyway, I never told anybody else about that demon stuff at the music store. Not for more than a decade. Eventually, things did get better. I did well enough in high school to earn a grant to attend college in Los Angeles. Finding myself again at a religious school, this time I appealed to God for forgiveness. It sounds cliche, but through repentance I came to know Jesus Christ. I also learned about studies on sleep paralysis that documented the effect of prayer with people suffering from the condition. Whether this was psychosomatic or not, Many attested to the power of Jesus' name and how it discharged the shadow figures by its mere utterance. In 2007, I reconnected with Jeff Strom and Ben Buckley with the advent of social media. While they still lived in Seattle, I had been in Los Angeles for 11 years. During a holiday visit back to Washington State, I drove out to a bar on Lake City Way and drank beers with my old friends from Wedgwood. They shared stories of what had happened over the last 15 years since we had lost touch. How Lincoln's current wife had also dated one of our classmates, and how Jeff's wife had at one point driven a wedge between Ben and Jeff to the degree they didn't speak for 5 years, or something like that. Jeff was expecting his first child. Lincoln had kids already who were nearly grown because he had joined the Navy and married earlier than others. Ben was getting married soon too. And Tyler? Well, they didn't have a lot of news to share about Tyler. The last time I saw Tyler was at a party my senior year of high school in 1996. It was a spring night, a few weeks before graduation. We were at a park near the Hawthorne Hill sign on Sandpoint Way. I was drinking keg beer, chatting with a classmate and some other boy I didn't know, but who happened to be Tyler Weigel's best friend at Roosevelt High School. This boy walked me up the street to the Inverness neighborhood, where another house party was underway. Inside, I encountered Tyler. He was sitting on a futon or fold-out bed. He was pretty wasted. We didn't speak about anything consequential. He said he'd had a run-in with another kid we both knew in 7th grade. I'll call him Chris M. Tyler told me through slurred speech how Chris was bitches. As I envisioned Tyler reading my message in 2020 to offer condolences for the loss of his mom, 24 years after our last meeting, I doubt he remembered that 1996 encounter. I'm 44 now. Just last month I flew back to Seattle with my wife and 2 boys to visit my parents for the Thanksgiving holiday. I attended my first NFL game, Seahawks versus Raiders at Lumen Field. One night after putting my kids to bed, I poked around my parents' basement in search of relics from my youth. I discovered yearbooks, some Calvin and Hobbes collections, and old toys and games I kept stored in the closet. This was the same closet the Ouija had sat for years before it suddenly became active. I thought of Tyler. I could only infer what had happened to him by reading social media posts. Some of his friends questioned what might have caused him to do it, whether it had something to do with COVID or the loss of his mother. People close to him knew he was in pain. But for some, it seemed, his suicide came as a surprise. To me, that notion is a little crazy. People don't commit suicide impulsively, right? My guess would be that it's something a person considers as a possibility and mulls over for a long time. My family and I returned to our home in Los Angeles. One day nearing the holidays, I switched on my writing computer, which happens to house my MP3 collection of 90s music. When this happens, I put a Winamp list on shuffle, and I'm suddenly infused with memories of the boy I used to be during that time. Like most fans of 90s grunge, I appreciate the major Seattle acts. Mudhoney's instrumental Generation Genocide fills me with images of the city, its colors and soundscapes. Soundgarden's Rusty Cage, that ignites my heart with Chris Cornell's piercing vocals. Now, the obscure songs are better at taking me back to specific moments, because those I couldn't have heard in any other period in life. Never on a throwback TV special or a greatest hits album. No, I only listened to Hammerbox's Bread in the freshman locker hallway of high school. And I only listened to Alice in Chains' Sap during my loneliest days of 1992, after starting at Seattle Prep, losing my middle school friends, changing schools again, in yet another North Side neighborhood. Now, Rage Against the Machine wasn't a Seattle band, nor a grunge band, but being a 1992 release, it still makes the playlist. In my opinion, there's no song angrier than Killing in the Name. And it's not even the repetitive, "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me" part that gets me. It's Zach De La Rocha's final scream. I recall the sheer violent anger I felt about being a poor, fat, friendless 14-year-old Asian kid trying to find his way at a wealthy, mostly white high school in urban Seattle. This is the song that happened to be playing on my Yamaha speakers the very moment my 6-year-old Kai walked into the room. "Dada, what are you listening to?" he asked. I switched off the song, telling myself he was too young to understand the lyrics. "Oh, it's the music Daddy listened to when he was young," I said. "It's kind of loud, huh?" Kai, being the very affectionate type, climbed into my lap. "Yeah, it's kind of loud." "Well, Daddy used to listen to a lot of angry music when he was a kid," I said. Kai looked at me, dumbfounded. "Why?" I tried very hard and managed to keep it together, but inside I was in pieces. This was because Kai didn't know the angry person I used to be. He only knows the dad that he adores, the dad who showers him with love and affection every day. Truth is, I don't want him to know why I was unhappy as a boy of 12, 13, or 14. Being a father, I understand how those adolescent years can be our most vulnerable. And if we can't escape our demons, they follow us into adulthood. They can even follow our children after we're gone. Later, while assembling toys for Christmas morning, I thought of my neighbor June Gilbert, who had gifted me the Ouija. June had passed away from cancer long ago. She didn't believe in God, the devil, or anything really. I guess she didn't see the harm. As I pondered this, something connected in my mind. A conclusion between my memories of Seattle, my parents, and my friends from the early 1990s. I remembered something. It shocked me I hadn't put it together sooner. I mentioned, sometime before the rebuking the demon incident, I decided I needed to get rid of the Ouija. Something within me knew that it was wrong. I feared something bad could happen to me. At 12, I had watched enough horror movies to know not to try and burn or dispose of the board out of the supernatural risk it could come back to me. So instead, I reasoned I just had to give it away to someone willing to take it. Tyler Weigel happened to be the very person to whom I'd given away my Ouija board sometime back in 1991.